March 2006 issue of Discover magazine. I'm a loud talker, by the way. Is on unintelligent design. Now, those of you who follow the creation evolution debate, you know that the word design in and of itself has become basically taboo, because if you've got design, by definition, you must have a designer. It's in this issue of this alleged science magazine that they're saying that all life evolved from virus particles. In fact, take a look at what the authors state. Now, there's news for intelligent designers and the rest of us to ponder. We humans and all life on Earth may have well evolved from the most unintelligent entities one can imagine. Genetic shards that do nothing but copy themselves. We are nobody's great idea. We are the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. That's evolution. It's humbling, but somehow comforting. Now, folks, I don't find a whole lot of comfort in that. But the reality is, realistically, there are only two worldviews. And that is, either there really is a God out there and we were created in His image, and every single person in this room has a soul, or we're here by mistake. We're just the random accident of atoms colliding together, or as they say, we're the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. Now, as you look at those two worldviews, number one, I want you to think about what is the difference in teaching one of those versus the other to your children and grandchildren. And number two, I want you to ask yourself, what's the only legal theory that we can teach in public schools in the United States? Because, folks, right now, what we're doing is we are filling their minds with only one worldview. And that is the idea that humans probably evolved from bacteria that lived more than 4 billion years ago. Or we're telling them, for instance, that we evolved from some ape-like creature. Or this is a page out of a biology book put out by Arms and Camp. Notice what it says. By the 7th month, the fetus looks from the outside like a tiny normal baby. But it's not. Now, why would we be telling our young people that a 7-month-old in the womb is not a human child? Furthermore, let me point out to everybody in this room what I consider to be the evil of marketing. Take a look at that image that's associated with that statement. Any lady in this room that's ever given birth will tell you that's not a 7-month-old, is it? Because, folks, by 7 months in the womb, they're doing aerobics. And yet, if they can get our kids to associate a picture like that with that statement, it does two things. Number one, it makes it a whole lot easier to abort, doesn't it? It also dehumanizes it. You say, but Brad, what's the big deal? I want to take about 5 or 10 minutes of your life tonight, and I want to share with you why it's a big deal. And in doing that, I'm going to give you a real quick history lesson. Now, I could go way, way back in this history lesson. We could go all the way back to 1859. Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species, but really that's too far back. Or we could even go to, say, 1925, to Dayton, Tennessee, to the Scopes monkey trial. But again, that's really too far back. What I want to do is I want to start during the lifetime of people in this room. So we'll go back to about 1950. 1950 is when the government decided they were going to get involved in science. They formed the National Science Foundation. In fact, those of you who are living back in the 1950s, you may remember that there was a race going on to space. And in fact, just a few short years later, 1957, the Russians beat us, Sputnik. They put a satellite up into space, and all of a sudden everybody was worried. What does that mean? What's going to happen? And there was a whole lot of pressure in America to produce scientists. 1957, they beat us. By 1959, we were celebrating the 100th anniversary of Charles Darwin's book, The Origin of Species, and you can imagine the media made a heyday out of it. But not just that, there was a lot of pressure to revamp our science curriculum. It was in 1959 that President Eisenhower asked Congress for $1 billion. $1 billion because his advisors had told him, we need to get rid of this idea that man originated from God, and we need to start teaching our kids evolution. 1959. Now, folks, $1 billion today, believe it or not, that's a whole lot of money. But $1 billion in 1959, that was an enormous amount of money. And he got it. And take a look at what happened just a couple of short years after that. Just, 3 short years later, 1962, the court found school prayer unconstitutional. Court case called Engel versus Vitale. They said, no longer are we going to have prayer in schools. The very next year, Madalyn Murray O'Hair, she won her famous lawsuit. And now, Bible reading in schools was struck down. So by 1963, we had taken out the idea that man originated from God, and instead we're now injecting this idea that we evolved. And at the same time, we're systematically removing prayer and Bible. But that's not all. Take a look. 1968, Arkansas was told you cannot substitute something other than evolution. In other words, you've got to teach evolution. You can't get around it. The very next year, 1969, our courts passed something called the no-fault divorce law. Now, how does that play into this whole deal? We'll talk to the young people for just a minute. Guys, it used to be really hard in the United States of America to get a divorce, believe it or not. In fact, in most of the 50 states, you had to wait a calendar year, and there had to either be abuse or adultery. Once they passed this, folks, you could get a divorce if somebody burned the toast. It made it easy. There had to be no fault involved. In fact, I tell people, young people especially, there are states in our union where it is easier to get a divorce than it is to get out of your cell phone contract. Think about it, folks. All of a sudden now, not only are we teaching evolution in schools, now we got the family unit dividing. A couple of years later, 1980, courts say you can't post the 10 Commandments anymore. You say, okay, Brad, what's the big deal? Who cares? Why does this even matter? Why are you talking about it to us? Folks, listen to me. It matters because what our children believe about where they came from, their origins, is going to determine how they behave. It's going to determine about what they think about their future and what they think about eternity. And it's going to determine the direction of our nation. Abraham Lincoln once said, the philosophy of the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. He's right. Interestingly, somebody else uttered a very similar phrase to that. Somebody you guys may remember by the name of Adolf Hitler, who said, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. You see, he knew if you want to change a nation, you start with the kids. You say, okay, Brad, what are the results? What have been the results since this change that we found in 1959? Well, I'm going to use the year 1963 as kind of our landmark year. And here's the reason I'm going to do that. Remember, Eisenhower asked for the money in 1959. It usually takes about 4 years to get the stuff into the textbooks. And by 1963, we'd outlawed prayer and we'd outlawed Bible reading. Let's see what happened. What's the data show? For instance, did we get evolution into the textbooks? Absolutely we did. On a huge scale. I mean, it literally went from just being a few thousand words to all of a sudden it was a central core theme throughout all the textbooks. But as a symptom of that, percentage of teenage young ladies who had premarital sex began to go up in every age category since 1963. In fact, I want you to notice the orange bar that's in all the graphs that I'm showing you, because you see, prior to that orange bar, we were still telling our students that they were created in the image and likeness of God. After the orange bar, that's when we began telling students you are the fortunate mistakes of countless biochemical morons. Part of that, sexually transmitted diseases in young people ages 10 to 14 is up 385% since 1963. Again, birth rates for unwed girls ages 15 to 19 is up 200% since 1963. In other words, we're having children have children. Interestingly, pregnancies are up 553%. You say, whoa, time out, Brad. Your math doesn't add up there. How can pregnancies be up 553%, but birth rates are only up 200? Well, that would be because just a couple of short years later, we passed Roe v. Wade. And now, a pregnancy did not equate a birth, did it? Out-of-wedlock births as a percentage of all births since 1963 has gone up every single year. And you say, okay, yeah, Brad, I hear what you're saying, but what's the big deal? Folks, the big deal is this. God had a plan for the family unit. And when you take a dad out of that picture, let me share with you what happens. You take a dad out, all of a sudden we've got young ladies who become teenage mothers, 53% of whom come from homes without a dad. 63% of the young people that take their lives, they come from homes without a father. 71% of high school dropouts are coming from homes without a dad. And in fact, right now as I'm talking to you, 85% of the young people in prison, they came from homes without a dad. Now, while you're thinking about that, unmarried couples living together is up 725% since 1963. And you look at me and you say, time out, Brad, hold on. You know, the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area has just boomed since 1963. And you're right, it has. Which is why I've got the little area in light color at the bottom. That's where we should be if we just go by population growth alone. But the reality is, folks, we're far off that scale. You look at divorce rates up since 1963. Violent crime in the United States has gone up 995%. Now let me make sure everybody in this room understands something. I'm not pulling these numbers out of thin air. Every single one of them is documented. In fact, I want you to read a newspaper clipping from the LA Times. Notice what it says. At most of the Oakland Unified School District's 92 schools, the fight against crime and violence is unending. An Uzi semi-automatic rifle with 15 hollow point bullets was among the weapons confiscated by district officials within the last year. Franklin Elementary School, trying to ensure that students know to hit the ground when bullets fly, they carry out shooting drills twice a year. Shooting drills, folks. Yeah, I'm the product of public schools. I remember fire drills. I remember tornado drills. I live in the South. I remember tornado drills. In fact, I kind of reveal my age a little bit. I was born at the very end of the Cold War. I can actually remember there were at least twice that they asked us to get under our desk for bomb drills, like the desk would actually do anything. But folks, I don't remember shooting drills. Suicide up 253% since 1963. In fact, it has gone from the 12th leading cause of death in young people, it now ranks a third. But folks, listen to me, that shouldn't surprise anybody in this room. Because if you take away God, you take away their hope. Child abuse is up 2,300% since 1963. Illegal drugs is up 6,000% since 1963. In fact, let me show you what our real report card looks like. If we were to take all of a snapshot of what evolution has done to our nation. Take a look. Since 1963, the United States of America has become a world leader in violent crime, divorce rate, teenage pregnancy, illegal drug use, and we've got the highest illiteracy rate of any industrial nation. In fact, I want to show you a graph that's going the other way, going down. That would be our SAT scores. We had an 18-year straight decline right after they instituted this idea of evolution. You say, but Brad, notice the end. You got these little bumps. It's coming back. Yet those are called calibrations. You know what a calibration is? It's where we make it easier. You see, folks, we got a problem. And it goes deeper than just your child reading things like millions and billions of years. It goes much deeper than that. In fact, let me impress upon you just how deep it does go. If we were to go back to a school setting in 1960, before we implemented this idea of evolution, some of you in this room were I'll point you out later, some of you were in here in high school in the 1960s. You go down the hallway, you walk into a classroom, and you ask a teacher in 1960, you say, hey, what are your biggest complaints? What are your biggest problems with children? They actually did this study. You can find the survey online. The top two answers, talking and chewing gum. Talking and chewing gum. Now, let's say that we go to the local high school today. Now, first thing we got to realize is you don't just get to walk into schools anymore, do you? You got to check in. You got to get through all of the different stages, whether they've got metal detectors or go to the principal's office. But let's say that we get our visitor pass. We walk into one of those classrooms and we ask a teacher, what's your biggest problem today? You think talking and chewing gum are going to be the top two? Well, let me show you after they did a survey. These are the top 7 or 8. Rape, robbery, assault, burglary, arson, bombings, murder, and suicide. Now, folks, please do not miss this next point. You take a 15-year-old from 1960, and you take a 15-year-old from today. Anatomically speaking, they are exactly the same, are they not? I mean, for all intent and purposes, they're both 15-year-old children, right? So what in the world has changed? Because we've gone from talking and chewing gum being the biggest problems in school to now we've got rape, robbery, murder, assault. I'm telling you, it's what we're putting in up here. When you tell a child there is no God and that they came from some fortunate mistake of countless biochemical morons, there is a price to be paid. And the sad part of it is, if you've got a child who's hit the age of, say, 4 or 5, they've already been indoctrinated. Even if they've never walked into a school. And you say, Brad, how can you say that? Because there's not too many 4 or 5-year-olds who are not absolutely enthralled with the dinosaurs. I mean, think about it for just a moment. They literally are kind of like the sugar stick candy that evolutionists hold out to our kids. Kids love them. I mean, you think about it for just a moment. They fill up our house with all these little plastic dinosaur figurines. I tell parents, if you have not stepped on one of those hard plastic dinosaur figurines in the middle of the night, you're not qualified yet as a parent, okay? I have 4 children. My second son, when he was about 2 years of age, for the life of him, he couldn't say the words apple juice. It came out with a Z. It was apple zzz. But at age 2, he could rattle off dinosaur names like nobody's business. We would sit on the couch, and we'd get one of those big picture books, and he would just start going through it. He said, Dad, look, there's an apatosaurus, a spinosaurus, a brachiosaurus. There's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Hey, could you give me some apples? Kids love them. But it's not just kids that love them. we adults also have a fascination with them, don't we? And magazines know that. They know that when they put their picture on the cover, they're almost guaranteed increased sales. And so they tell us all kinds of amazing trivia and facts about these things, where they were found, what they think they ate. Like, for instance, the largest dinosaur that we have discovered to date, it's a creature called the Argentinosaurus. This guy, they believe he weighed somewhere in the neighborhood of 110 tons. In fact, if you want to see a replica of him, you've got to go to the Fernbank Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, where he stretches from one end of the museum to the next. Now, just to give you an idea how big this guy really is, if you look over here at the left-hand screen, take a look right over here at the right side of it. That's a full-size T-Rex that doesn't come up to this guy's hip bone. He was massive. But folks, it is because of these same dinosaurs that we really are losing a lot of our kids. Because think about it for just a moment. Kids already by the age of 5, they believe dinosaurs walked this earth long before man ever did. In fact, here's what I want to do for just a moment. I want to walk through the life of one of your children in this congregation. Maybe it's your child, your grandchild. We'll start out when they're about 2, maybe 3. When we start filling up the house with all those games, all those figurines, those puzzles, all of the dinosaur stuff. In fact, some of you grandparents, you're guilty. You're guilty of buying those books without even reading them, without realizing they say dinosaurs walked on this earth millions of years ago, long before man ever did. Your child hits about 4. It's a February morning in Texas, a little bit cool. Cool for you guys is like 92, something like that. So mom's over there, she's stirring up the instant oatmeal. All the while, your child is reading the package and learning about evolution. They get a little bit older. They hit about 5. They're starting to eat everything, and all you ever hear is, I want a snack. So you start giving them snack crackers while they learn about evolution. They hit 7. Finally, they're big enough, old enough to take to a fine dining establishment. So you load them up in the car, you drive them out to, for instance, Wendy's. Some of the parents understand what I'm saying. You go through the drive-thru, you get that kid's meal, all the while, what are they learning about? Evolution. Or maybe your child doesn't like Wendy's. Maybe they like Arby's. And yet there again, what are they learning? Evolution. They get a little bit older. Now they're about, 8, 9. They start taking field trips to local museums. Local museums that are implanting this idea of millions and billions of years in their mind. Or maybe they run up to the Smithsonian. Or maybe they actually make it over to Atlanta to that Fernbank. Or maybe they go to Chicago to the Field Museum where Sue is on display. Now stop right there for just a moment. Take a look at that picture. How many of the parents of those children who signed permission slips for them to go on that field trip, how many of them do you think actually thought about what they would be reading on those placards? Because, folks, I took that picture. And I also took a picture of what they're reading on those placards, and I promise you there's not a way in the world to harmonize what those kids are reading with God's Word. They get a little bit older. They're 10, 11. All of a sudden, they start reading chapter books. Now, I want to do something for just a moment just to kind of impress upon some folks. Young people in this room, how many of you in this room are familiar with the Magic School Bus? Let me see your hand real high. We got some older young people in this room. He's not. We got some older than that. Kids love it. It's a very popular kids series. You open up this particular book, and you'll notice it's got a dinosaur chasing a caveman. But look at what it says. The book says this story is make-believe, and his friend says there were no dinosaurs in the time of cave people. In fact, in the top left-hand corner it says, no people ever saw a dinosaur. When early humans appeared on the earth, dinosaurs had already been dead for millions of years. People found out about dinosaurs from fossils. Or maybe your child likes the Magic Treehouse. Another very popular kids series. Folks, in this one, you don't even get into the book. You're actually still in the introduction when you read human beings, of course, had not yet evolved. In fact, you open up that particular book right to the middle, and there's one of those timelines that have got dinosaurs living long time ago, and then finally, man comes along. Your child gets a little bit older. Now they're 13. They're taking science courses. They take biology. They take botany. And one day they come home with a book called Evolution, A Change Over Time. It's a Prentice Hall book. Let me ask you, do you think we would use dinosaurs to teach kids evolution? Like if we were to open this book, do you think it would have dinosaurs in it? They're right. In fact, take a look. Page 10, page 16, page 25, 28, 29, 36, 38, 39, page 46, 66, page 96, 97, page 98, 99, page 100. In fact, in a 100-page book, 32 pages contain something about dinosaurs on it. Let me make sure everybody in this room understands what the dilemma really is. Because there's some of you in here that right now you're kind of going, yeah, okay, so what? Our kids are learning through their textbook that dinosaurs died out roughly 65 million years ago. And we came along carrying our clubs, allegedly, roughly 3 million years ago. But the Bible paints a totally different picture. The Bible actually paints a picture that everything is created in 1 week. Now, we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about how long that week was, but suffice it to say, it was 6 days. Now, when were all land-dwelling creatures created? Day 6. Let's see if I get the kids up here to sing the song. They can tell y'all. What day was man created? Day 6. And folks, if that's true, and it is, that means we had to coexist. Now, I realize for some of you in this room thinking about that, you're thinking, there's no way. That's not what I've learned all my life. Folks, if the Bible is inspired, and it is, it has to be. Now, I'm going to show you the evidence to prove it. But I need you to understand right up front, if all land-dwelling creatures and man were created the same day, that doesn't leave us a whole lot of wiggle room. It's not a question of did they exist. The real question is when. You know, unfortunately, 50, 60 years ago, we did a poor job in the church of teaching our young people about this topic. And we would teach them either that they were a fairy tale or, this was another one of my favorites, that God just hid the bones for us to find later on. Okay, well, last time I checked, God is not the author of chaos. Folks, we have found their fossilized remains on all 7 continents, Arctic to Antarctic and everywhere in between. In fact, I was talking to a gentleman from Antarctica about, 3-4 weeks ago now. He called the office. He was telling me about one of the latest discoveries in Antarctica. Dinosaurs. A couple of months ago, I was getting off an airplane coming from Oregon. Had a preacher buddy call me. He said, Brad, we need you to come to our church. I thought he meant for a seminar. I said, well, I think I've got openings in a year or two. He said, no, we need you to come now. We got bones. I'm sitting there thinking, what are these people doing? Sure enough, I showed up, and they had been digging an elevator shaft. And in the bottom of that shaft, there were all kind of bones. Folks, we spent literally hours measuring them, taking them out, taking pictures of them. I got loads of pictures in my computer. You know, if anybody ever tells you there's not dinosaurs in the church, I got pictures of them, okay? The question is not, did they exist? The real question is when. Now, how important do you really think this whole topic is to the whole creation evolution debate? I want you to look at this quote. This is from a guy named Philip Kitcher. He said, solid evidence for the coexistence of dinosaurs and humans would shake the foundations of evolutionary theory because, of course, the dinosaurs are supposed to have been long extinct by the time hominids or early man arrived on the scene. I want everybody in the room to remember what he's saying. Solid evidence of humans coexisting with dinosaurs would shake the evolutionary theory. Because we're going to look at some of that evidence. It is not by mistake that every single time you see something about dinosaurs, that evolutionists are trying to plant this idea, we've never seen them. They lived a long time ago. Tonight, what I want us to do is I want us to get through all the propaganda and actually look at the evidence. What does that say? Before I show you that evidence, I need about 1 minute of your time to give you another real quick history lesson. This time, though, on the topic of dinosaurs. I want you to remember a date. That date is roughly 1845, because that's when a guy named Sir Richard Owen actually coined the term dinosaur. He used two Greek words, dinos, sauros, translated by him as fearfully great lizard. That was in roughly 1845. And that's kind of when our fascination with these things began. As I mentioned, it's not a question of did they exist, the real question is when. Let's take a look at some evidence together. We'll start, for instance, in January 2005, when researchers very quietly reported that they'd found a mammal that had eaten a dinosaur. And you say, okay, Brad, so what? Folks, according to the evolutionary timeline, dinosaurs evolved into mammals millions of years later. How do you have a mammal that was eating one? Or maybe somebody could explain to me this Mesopotamian cylinder seal, a rock stone seal that looks an awful lot like what you and I would call an apatosaurus. Or maybe somebody could explain to me, you get out your archaeological spade and your brush, and all of a sudden you uncover these tablets. Tablets that are attributed to Narmer, the legendary first pharaoh of United Egypt, that have got dinosaur-like creatures carved into them. Or maybe somebody could explain to me these stones of Peru, the Ica stones. A gentleman by the name of Dr. Javier Cabrera was given one of these stones as a birthday gift. And he noticed it had these elegant carvings on it. He asked the native there in Peru, he said, "Where'd you get these?" The man told him, he said, "Oh, these are burial stones." Burial stones that the ancient Incan Indians would place into their tombs. Well, Dr. Cabrera set out to find as many as he could. All told, he found about 11,000 of them in tombs all over the area. And they had all kinds of dinosaurs pictured on them. But not just dinosaurs, they had dinosaurs and men. In fact, if you take a look very carefully, the lower right picture's got a guy, he's got a spear, he's actually hunting it. And you say, well, Brad, surely these are a hoax. Surely this is an internet hoax. Well, let me point out to everybody in this room, absolutely there are people out there who are willing to make fakes and to sell it to people. People have always done that. But I know the real ones, they had details that they got right that we've only just recently understood. Scientifically speaking, I could give you 3 examples. I'm only going to give you one tonight. On the screen, you'll notice there are 3 of these Ica stones. And you'll notice outlined in yellow, they had these dermal frills on their back. These are sauropod dinosaurs that the ancient Incan Indians drew with these bumpy dermal frills. Researchers looked at it and said, that's not right. We've never seen that in the fossil record. That was until 1992, when that's exactly what they found. You see, it was 1992 before we realized the Incan Indians were right. In fact, commenting on it, Ellen Morris Bishop, she said, the biggest spines found were about 9 inches long, shaped a little bit like a shark's dorsal fin. The smallest at the tail tip were about 3 inches high. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the 800-year-old Buddhist temple in Cambodia that was uncovered just 3 short years ago, folks. This one, you can't fake. They came in with what you and I would call industrial strength Roundup. Vines had grown all over this temple. They sprayed this stuff. They pulled back the vines, basically wanting to turn this area into a tourist trap. They burned all the vines in the middle of this temple, and that's when they noticed it had these elegant carvings on it. In fact, if you look carefully, the top of the screen right here on top right, that guy's a monkey. You may see his face, his front legs, his back legs, his tail going over his head. The guy below that, some of you may have on your wall at home, that's actually a deer. You see his antlers here, his tail in the up position, his back legs, his front legs. But the artist didn't just stop with things like monkeys and deers. He also carved things like dinosaurs. And folks, how'd they know what to carve if they'd never seen those? Interestingly, I've had a couple of buddies that have gone over and taken pictures for me. They've taken the tours. They came to this particular pillar, and they're snapping shots for me. And they asked the tour guide, they say, hey, how do you guys explain this? The tour guide looks at him and says, I know what you're thinking, but we're supposed to tell you it's a porcupine. I've seen porcupines. That's not one of them. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the dinosaur figurines from Acambaro. A gentleman was riding on the back of a horse, and from that elevated position, he looked down and he saw the first of these ceramic figurines. Now, all told, they found over 40,000 of these. They decided they would have these things dated. So they sent it to 2 labs here in the United States. Now, they didn't send the whole figurine. They would just send, for instance, a little piece of a tail, a little piece of a foot. Came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC. That's when they realized, hey, that would mean that man had to have seen these things. So they sent additional samples to be what's called thermoluminescent tested. They really wanted to make sure they had this thing right. It came back with dates of roughly 2000 BC. And that's when they made their mistake. Instead of waiting until both labs verified it in writing, they called them, they said, hey, you know that material that we're sending you? It's coming from dinosaur figurines. At which point both labs did the same thing. They withdrew their results, said, we're sorry, we're unable to give you any accurate readings on your material. Well, in 1990, we caught them, so to speak. 1990, we sent some dinosaur bone off to the University of Arizona. Didn't tell them it was dinosaur bone. We simply said, this is a blind study. Can you date this material? They did. It came back with dates of roughly 9,000 years before present. Now, granted, that's not 6,000. But that's an awful far cry from 65 million. Or maybe somebody could explain to me this child's poncho that a buddy of mine, Dennis Swift, discovered in the Nazca tombs. 11-year-old child buried with this particular poncho that his mother had embroidered. Or maybe somebody could explain to me the petroglyphs at National Bridges National Monument. You know, if you were to go there today, just outside of Blanding, Utah, there are 3 of these natural sandstone bridges, one of which is called Kachina. And it's on that particular sandstone bridge that the Anasazi Indians, they carved all kinds of things. You can go there today, you can see things like bighorn sheep, and you can see things like dinosaurs. Now, folks, how many pieces of evidence would I have to give you in order to debunk the whole thing? You know, realistically, all it would take is what? Just one. I'm not done yet. On these same bridges, they've got these flying reptiles, pterodactyls, pteranodons. Allegedly, those things lived 65 million years ago along with the dinosaurs. And yet, I want you to remember the next two slides. They're not flashy. They don't have the best picture. But when you understand, these are from historians who actually saw these things. First is a guy by the name of Herodotus. Look what he said. Herodotus was a Greek historian from the 5th century BC. He said, "There's a place in Arabia to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. When I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and like as possible to the wings of a bat." All right, so let me get this straight. This guy knows the difference between birds, bats, and flying reptiles? Yeah, he does. The other historian, some of you have actually heard of, his name is Josephus, Jewish historian who actually lived during the time some of the apostles were still walking the earth. This is the guy who chronicled the death of Jesus Christ at the hands of Pilate, and he also wrote about flying reptiles. Now, folks, think about that for just a moment. Charles Darwin wasn't even a thought yet. And yet, here you've got a historian talking about these flying serpents. Or maybe somebody could explain to me this textile down in the Museum of Peru identified as a dinosaur. Or maybe you could explain to me the tomb of Richard Bell. Yeah, if you ever get over to England, let me encourage you, go to a little city called Carlisle. I was there about 3 weeks ago. Have them roll up the carpet you see right there at the bottom of the screen. Or if you've got 4 kids who will volunteer, just have them pull it back. Because below that, there's a tomb of a guy who died in 1496. 1496. You remember when I told you the word dinosaur was coined? About 1845. So in round numbers, this guy died about 350 years before the word dinosaur even came into existence. When you have them roll up that particular thing, you'll notice that marble, elegant tomb. And when you get down on your hands and your knees, you can start picking out animals. You'll see fish, you'll see dogs, and you'll see things like dinosaurs. 350 years before the word came into existence. Or maybe somebody could explain to me this Mayan vase. Or maybe you could explain these textiles taken from tombs. Or maybe somebody in this room could help me understand the finding of Dr. Samuel Hubbard. Now, this guy was a curator for the Oakland, California Museum of Natural Science. He sets out on an expedition down in the Grand Canyon trying to prove that the Native Americans had been on this continent much longer than we were giving them credit for. They end up going down all the little side canyons, eventually making their way down the Havasupai Canyon, looking for pottery, looking for clothing, and he was right. He found his evidence. He found their pottery, he found their clothing, but he also stumbled across their cave art. Etched into those canyon walls, there were pictures that had taken men quite literally hours to carve out. You say, pictures of what, Brad? Well, let's see. There was buffalo, sheep, dinosaurs, oxen, men. Run that list by me one more time. Buffalo, sheep, oxen, men, and dinosaurs. In fact, I want you to read with me what Dr. Hubbard had to say regarding his find. He said, taken all in all, the proportions are good. The huge reptile is depicted in the attitude in which man would most likely see it. Reared on its hind legs, balancing with a long tail, either feeding or in a fighting position, possibly defending itself against a party of men. He goes on to say, the fact that some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. The fact that the animal is upright and balanced on his tail would seem to indicate that the prehistoric artist must have seen it alive. Now, I brought a picture of what Dr. Hubbard found, and I hate to be the one to tell you, folks, that right there is not a sheep, not an ox, but it's an awfully good representation of a dinosaur we now know existed, called the Edmontosaurus. Now, for all those in the room who are trivia buffs, you see a little white dot in the center of that? That would be a bullet hole. A bullet hole from an evolutionist who was trying to get rid of the evidence. Or how about this one? Soft tissue. Soft tissue in a T-Rex bone. I actually talked to the lady who made this discovery. Her name is Mary Schweitzer. She shared with me, she said, Brad, it was really discovered by accident. They had the long bone of this T-Rex. They were trying to get it back to the lab. They had to cut it in half. She said when we did that, we were able to look inside where we found soft tissue, blood vessels, and what she thinks are blood cells. And folks, you ask any molecular biologist worth their salt at all, they're going to tell you, soft tissue, blood vessels, blood cells, they don't stick around for 65 million years. I asked her the one question that I thought was pretty relevant. I said, why do you think we've never found soft tissue in a dinosaur bone before? Her answer sent a chill right up my back. She said, maybe because we've never thought to look. Since her discovery, we found soft tissue in 3 other dinosaur discoveries. In fact, we're now pulling proteins out of T-Rex bones, folks. Or maybe you can explain this pottery or these burial clothes dated around 700 AD. You see, when you start to peel it back, we got loads of evidence. You can go to Rome and you can see a mural that was hand-laid tiles put down during the 2nd century. In fact, if I had unlimited time tonight, I could sit here and click away for another 15, 20 minutes. Easily. But folks, you'll never see this in your children's textbooks or on CNN or in Time magazine. And part of the reason why is because if you allow me to show this to your kids for an hour, you know what? They will always question evolution. And we got some folks who are committed to a godless theory in our nation who do not want our children holding to the idea that there's a God. You say, okay, Brad, I hear what you're saying and all, but man, well, why don't we read about them in the Bible? Listen very carefully. It's not a fair question. You say, what do you mean? When was the word dinosaur coined? About 1845. When was this book printed in English? King James Version, 1611. Okay, how do you get a word in a book in 1611 if that word doesn't come along until roughly 1845? A better question for you to ask me is there compelling evidence of dinosaur-like creatures in this book? Now, that's a fair question. And to that, I would say, if you got a Bible tonight, open it up to the book of Job. Folks, we could look at the book of Isaiah, because you'll find them there. We could look at the book of Psalm, because you'll find them there as well. I love the book of Job, because it's in Job we find this guy, he is smitten with all kinds of trials. You remember, he loses his family, he loses his flocks, he is covered in boils from the crown of his head to the bottom of his feet. In fact, in Job chapter 2, you find his wife, she walks up to him, she says, why don't you just curse God and die? Job doesn't do that, does he? Because very soon after she made that foolish comment, we find his 3 friends coming on the scene. And I would put them in parentheses on purpose because they're not really what you and I would call friends. What they really are is nosy. You may have some friends like this. These are busybodies that are assuming Job sinned and God is paying him back. And they want to know what he did. So what you're going to read in your Bible for the next 25 plus chapters is a dialogue between Job and these 3 guys. And obviously I'm paraphrasing, but it goes something like this. You got Eliphaz, friend number 1 comes up and says, man, wow, Job, what happened? What did you do? And Job says, I didn't do anything. Bildad, friend number 2 tags in and says, come on now, Job. We can look at your life. We know you see it. You need to repent. What'd you do? And he says, I didn't do anything. Zophar, friend number 3, tags in and says, come on now, Job. We're your friends. You can tell us. And you need to get your life right. What'd you do? I didn't do anything. Until finally, Job burst out and he requests to speak to God. In fact, take a look at Job chapter 13, verse 22. When he tells God, he says, you speak and I'll respond to you, or you let me speak and you respond to me. Basically telling God, look, you can go first or I'll go first. It doesn't matter. Well, folks, in Job chapter 38, we have God's response to that. The Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you will answer me. God's saying, you wanted to talk? Okay, we're fixing to talk, but I'm going to be the one doing all the talking. And for the next 3 chapters, God deluges Job with question after question. If you have never read Job chapter 38 through 40, do that tonight, because it is a great lesson in humility. He starts out, he says, hey, Job, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Job, where's the dwelling place of light? Job, you see snow and hail? How do I make those? Or Job, what about the eagle and the hawk? How do they fly? Or Job, what about the behemoth? Job chapter 40, verse 15. Look now at the behemoth which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. What in the world? What's a behemoth? And somebody says, well, Brad, I'm so glad you came to visit us this weekend, because my Bible tells you. I got a little footnote in my Bible says it's either an elephant or a hippopotamus. Well, let me just politely remind you, those footnotes are not inspired, are they? But I'll go along with you for a minute. Let's look at the description of this creature. The Bible says in verse 16, lo, now his strength is in his loins, the force is in the navel of his belly. So obviously this was a creature with a large stomach, right? That guy have a big belly? Yep. That guy have a big belly? Yep. That guy have a big belly? Yep. Keep reading. Job chapter 40, verse 17. He moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. And folks, when it is talking about a cedar here, it's going to be talking about some of the largest of trees. You say, Brad, how do you know that? Well, we do a little word study in the Bible. And you remember we discovered that it's the cedars of Lebanon that were actually used to build the temple, wasn't it? These are massive trees. God is describing this thing. He says he moves his tail like a cedar. Let me ask you, that look like a cedar to anybody in this room? Not exactly. How about that? Not exactly. That's getting a whole lot closer, isn't it? Somebody says, okay, Brad, I hear what you're saying, but man, you got a problem. Because Job was a post-flood book. And by that I mean this. We believe Job was one of the first books written, but the events of Job actually happened after the flood. You're going to stand up there and tell this room God created man and dinosaurs on day 6. Absolutely he did. And then we're going to read about this creature called the behemoth. And there's another one in chapter 41 called the Leviathan. And they're in the book of Job. And that book comes after the flood. Wouldn't that mean, yep, they had to be on that boat. Now, before you pack me away and put me in a nice rubber room somewhere, give me just a moment to explain. Anybody in this room ever asked the question, did Noah have to take adult animals on that boat? Could he have taken juveniles? Well, let's think about it for a moment. They eat less food. They produce less waste. They take up less room. In fact, what was the job of the animals when they got off the boat? It was to replenish the earth, was it not? So they needed to have a long reproductive life ahead of them. Folks, listen to me. I don't mean to be disrespectful to anybody in this room. I don't think there was any animal that got on that boat holding an AARP card. I don't think it happened. Ever seen what a dinosaur comes from? An egg, right? You realize the largest dinosaur egg we've discovered would fit very cleanly in both of my hands? I'll go ahead and warn you guys, I love the ark. Love the flood. I spent about a year and a half restudying it. I got enough material. In fact, if somebody will take that clock off the wall, we can go to 12 o'clock. I'll never even take a breath on the flood. Love it. But if there's anybody in this room that doesn't think you can get dinosaurs on it, I want to see you, because you can get 522 railroad boxcars on it without any trouble. And if you don't think the God who can create the animals knows the dimensions for a boat, how big it needs to be to hold the animals, you're not giving him much credit, are you? Only question that we got left before I let you guys take a real quick break: what happened to them? Now, I wish I could tell you. I wish I could stand up here and say, well, they died out because of blank. But the reality is we don't know for sure. And we got lots of theories. In fact, about a month and a half ago, there was a new theory launched that maybe they, and I'm going to try to put this tactfully, maybe they emitted too much methane themselves and killed themselves. Moms and dads, you can explain that later. I brought 5 of the 27 theories that I'm aware of. Our kids are going to hear about that asteroid. Number 2 talks about an exploding star flooding the earth with radiation. Number 3, the earth's climate became too warm, too cold, too dry, or too wet for the dinosaurs' health. Number 4, change in the dinosaurs' diet resulted in weakened eggshells that broke after being laid. Sad to say, number 5 really is a scientific theory. A laxative plant in dinosaurs' diet disappeared, and they all died of constipation. I'll let you decide if that one's possible, probable, or pitiful. Folks, I'll give you a real quick rendition of what I think happened. I think, number 1, nobody in this room can really appreciate what it means in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, when God declared everything very good. I think this earth was vastly different. And I think into that particular condition, these animals thrived. I can prove it archaeologically. Sahara Desert used to be a rainforest. Antarctica has got palm trees and fruit trees growing below the ice. I know it used to be different. And then I think God unleashed his fury on sin in a flood. And I think it changed everything. It changed our weather patterns. And I think they were on that ark, and I think when they came off of it, all of a sudden, they're in a totally new environment. And those little warm-blooded, fuzzy mammals, I think they started thriving. And folks, listen to me. I believe the evidence I showed you tonight proves that they made it several thousand years post-flood. But I don't think they thrived anymore. 2 things I think got them. Number 1, the changing climate. And number 2, what has man always done to animals we fear? We kill them, hunt them. I'm going to give you one piece of scripture to chew on while you're taking your break. If you got a Bible, open it up to Genesis chapter 1. Take a look with me, verse 29 and verse 30. Genesis chapter 1, take a look. The Bible says, and God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is on the face of all the earth. Every tree whose fruit yields seed, to you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, to everything that creeps on the earth in which there is life, I have given every green herb for food, and it was so. Prior to the flood, what were both man and animals? According to this book, they're vegetarian, folks. Man, that explains a lot. That explains how dinosaurs and man could have gotten along, coexisted, because they're both vegetarian. It explains how you can get all the animals on the boat without them eating each other. They're all vegetarian. It explains how Noah could have gotten the food necessary because they're all vegetarian. Now look at Genesis chapter 9, verse 3. Right after the flood, God making his promise with Noah, he says, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. I've given you all things, even as the green herbs. So right after the flood, what does he say? Fire up the barbecue. So we're about 20 years post-flood. God said, now you can eat meat. Noah says, boys, go out and get us something to eat. Shem, Japheth, they walk out. They see a squirrel. Squirrel. They see a possum. And they see a stegosaurus. And they look over here and they think, he's small and greasy. We'll leave him for the people in Oklahoma. We could eat on that guy for a week. Folks, here's what I want to make sure you do not miss. Our children have questions, and they deserve honest answers to their questions. They're going to get them answered somewhere. I'm telling you, if you don't answer their questions with this truth right here, then one day they will be sitting before somebody wearing a starch white lab coat who is a godless professor who has no intention of teaching them anything about this, who will answer their question and who may shatter their faith.